Welcome to Learning English with Captain BinoyVarakil, Assistant Professor, Department of English, St. Joseph's College, Devagiri, Calicut, Kerala. Today we start another lecture series, and this lecture series we are focusing on reading fiction. In fact, reading fiction is a core course for the fourth semester BA English main students of the colleges of University of Calicut. And we commence our lecture series on fiction and narrative strategies today. And the initial part of this lecture, we are discussing what is fiction. In the subsequent lectures, we will be discussing different types of fiction. So today we discuss what is fiction, a general discussion on fiction, and thereafter we are discussing a short history of novel. That is, of course, a short history of novel in world literature, European literature, British literature, Malayalam literature, and thereafter we are discussing different aspects of fiction. So let us begin our discussion. So the term fiction refers to any literary narrative writing, whether in prose or verse, which is invented by the writer and not an account of something that happened in reality. So this is the general notion of fiction. It is any literary narrative writing. It can be in prose or verse. And another thing is, it is in fact the result of the imagination of the writer. It is not an anecdote, or it is not a narrative of something that happened in reality. And commonly the term is associated with novels and short stories. It involves events, characters, and what the character say or do, or in other words, it can be defined as a long narrative in prose detailing the actions of fictitious people. As a whole, it's a very effective medium for depicting human thoughts and actions. So we have to come to the very definition of fiction. Fiction is long narrative in prose detailing the actions of fictitious people. So it is, of course, fictitious people. Fictitious refers to imaginary. So it is long narrative in prose detailing the actions of fictitious people or imaginary people. It doesn't do anything with real men and women. Now we have to understand, okay, the very term fiction, it is in fact an umbrella term for novels and short stories. And in our discussion, we are just looking at what is a short story, how is a short story different from a novelette, and how is a novelette and short story, how are novelettes and short stories different from novel? Or rather, we have to define short stories. What are short stories? What are novelettes? What are novels? Critics are of the opinion that a short story is a literary art form, something which is read in a single sitting. So it's a story, it's a narrative. It's of course about fictitious people, imaginary people, created by the writer, and it is something that is read in, you can read the complete story, or you can complete the reading of the story in a single sitting. That's a short story. And a novel, now short story, novelette, novel. So we come to the first short story, then we go to the definition of novel. Novels are very extended narratives in the case of which there is no limit to the number of pages, the number of characters, the number of incidents, or the number of setting or anything of that sort. It is really narrative, long extended narratives in prose or novels. So short story, something that is meant for a single sitting reading. Novel, extended narratives, limitless, any number of characters, any number of incidents, any number of setting. Alright, that is novel. And novelette is something that is between a short story and a novel, that is bigger than a short story and of course smaller than a novel. So this way we can define fiction. So fiction, the term refers to short stories, novelettes and novel. Now we are moving forward to the very discussion of the term novel. How do we have the term novel? The word novel is derived from the Italian word novelle or novella, Novella. So from novella, the Italian word, we have the word novel. And in Italian, novella means a little new thing. So this Italian word novella means a little new thing. So from this Italian, this is Italian, very important for us. From this Italian word novella, which means a little new thing, we have the word novel, N-O-V-E-L, novel. So novel, the word in English comes from novella, okay, novella, the Italian word, which means a little new thing. So it has another meaning. Another meaning is a fresh story, a fresh story. So it can either mean a little new thing, number two, a fresh story. So from this word, Italian word novella, which means a little new thing or a fresh story in prose, a fresh story in prose, comes the word novel. And we have to understand something more. Word for novel in most of the European languages and European countries is Roman, R-O-M-A-N, Roman or Roman. So from this word Roman, we have the word novel. Alright, this way we have to understand. Roman is the corresponding word for novel in the European languages. And now we have to understand that novel is developing from medieval romances. The novel, okay, let us just conclude that novel, the word comes from the Italian word novella, which means a little new thing or a fresh story in prose. And now we have to understand how do we have the very concept of novel in English. So we have the European countries and the European languages, and there was a practice of writing romances in the medieval period in Europe. So from the medieval practice of writing romances, novel writing just evolves, develops. And let us understand that in European languages, the word for stories, the word for novels is roman, and from roman, of course, novel developed. And we have to understand that novel develops from romances, medieval romances. And now we have to understand what are romances, medieval romances. So romances are medieval tales based on legends, chivalric romance, chivalric love, adventure, or supernatural, some supernatural elements. So from these medieval romances, which are of course about the activities of knights. We have knights, aristocracy, we have knights, squires, warriors, all these people. So from the activities of chivalric deeds of the medieval romances developed the novel. Romances are prose narratives treating imaginary characters involved in events remote in time, place, and usually heroic, adventurous, or mysterious. So romances deal with, of course, the love element. There is, of course, the legends. We have a lot of legends, adventure. We have supernatural. We have, and we have to understand that romance has a particular structure. Normal structure of romances are, of course, a meeting between the hero and heroine, and of course we have a separation and reunion. That is the normal structure of romances. So from medieval romances we have the development of novel, and now let us understand, let's look at some of the important romances, medieval romances, from which, or rather models of examples of romances from which the novel might have developed. So we have Boccaccio's Decameron. So from the story collection of Decameron of Boccaccio, and also the ancient romance like the Golden Hours, 2nd century Golden Hours, and Golden Hours of 2nd century is in Latin. It was originally written in Latin, later translated to English, and it is written by the writer Apuleius. So Apuleius' Latin Golden Hours is considered to be one of the medieval romances that paved the way for the origin of novel in English. And thereafter we have, of course, a number of Arthurian romances, a lot of tales or short romances based on the life of King Arthur. And from these Arthurian romances, of course, we have the habit of writing prose pieces in English. And Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is, of course, yet another medieval romance which led to the origin of the English novel. And besides that, we have the story collection of the Italian writer, the 14th century Italian writer Giovanni Boccaccio's. Boccaccio's Decameron is again another collection of short stories, and from the short stories of Boccaccio also we have the inspiration for writing novels. So all these romances, medieval romances, are translated into English, and we have the English translation of medieval romances in England, and these English translations help the English writers attempt narratives, prose narratives, and of course these medieval romances have a focused plot and point of view, and from the very aspect of the focused plot and point of view of the medieval romances, the prose attempts for novel occur in Britain, and of course we have a number of novels in Britain during the 18th. Of course, attempts of novel we have in many pieces, like we have John Bunyan, we have Daniel Defoe, we have, of course, Jonathan Swift. So Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels, Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. So these are all attempts at novel, because all these novels, we call them novels, yeah, they are attempts, and all these novels have a focused plot, incidents, beginning, middle, and end, characterization, plot, and a kind of philosophy of life, all this. So slowly we have the development of novel in English. And now we are just, so we can just come to the summarization that novel is one of the recent literary forms, and it is believed to be born in the 18th century in English. It is believed to be born in the 18th century, and of course it develops from the medieval romances. Medieval romances. Medieval romances are, of course, story collections, short tales or stories, and the center of these medieval, so many medieval romances were written, and some of them are, of course, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and Giovanni Boccaccio's Italian Decameron. So also we have the collection of Apuleius' Golden Hours. These are all examples for romances. From these romances developed prose narratives, a lot of prose narratives like Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress and Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels. Gradually we have the development of the English novel, and now we are, of course, before going in to the details of the origin and development of the English novel, we are just looking at some of the novels which are the first novels written in world literature. Or rather, we are going to look at a short history of English novel. Before discussing short history of the English novel, we have to discuss a short history of novel in the world, and which is the first novel that is written in world literature. And when it comes to the question of the first novel in world literature all over the world, we have to understand the novel of a Japanese writer, that is Murasaki. So Japanese writer Murasaki's novel, The Story of Ganchi. The Story of Ganchi is considered to be the story of Ganchi. Is considered to be the first novel in world literature, and this is written in 1000 AD. 1000 AD we have the Story of Ganchi by Murasaki, the Japanese writer. And now we come to the first novel in Western literature or European literature, and the first novel in Western literature is Pantagruel, Gargantua and Pantagruel, that is written by Francois Rabelais. Francois Rabelais, Rableius. Okay, so Francois Rabelais, Gargantua, and Pantagruel. And Pantagruel is considered to be the first novel in European or Western literature. And now we have, of course, British literature. In British literature, critics are of the opinion that 1740 Pamela of Samuel Richardson is the first novel, and Pamela is also titled Virtue Rewarded. And now, of course, we have Malayalam literature. In Malayalam literature, 1887 Kundalada by Appu Nedungadi is considered to be the first novel in Malayalam. But when it comes to characterization and plot and the evolution of a particular point of view or a philosophy of life, etc., critics are of the opinion that 1889 Indulega of O. Chandu Menon is the first Malayalam novel. So this is the introduction to fiction in general. What is fiction? What are the different genres that come under the term fiction? Short story, novel, and novel. And novel, the origin of novel develops from medieval romances of Europe, translations in English, and English medieval romances slowly lead to the development of novel in England or Britain, and these English novels are taken to India during the colonial period, the British period in India, and of course we have translations into regional languages of all these novels, and Indians also become familiar with the novel form, and thereafter a lot of novels in Indian languages as well. So we have world literature, Murasaki's story of Ganji. Western literature, we have Rabaleiu's Gargantua and Pantagruel, and British literature, English literature, we have of course Richardson's Pamela, and Malayalam literature, Appudadangari Kundalada. So this way we sum up our introduction on the study of fiction. So next lecture we will be looking at different types of novels. There are different types of novels, and subsequent lectures will be discussing elements of novel as such. So today we conclude our discussion. Thank you so much for listening. May God bless you all.